evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our holiday baking workshop. If you would like to see the ingredients and instructions for each recipe, please follow the link provided in the chat. The program will begin shortly.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us this evening at the San Francisco State University's first ever online cookie demonstration. We are just thrilled that you could be here. My name is Nicole Lang. I am the interim associate vice president for alumni relations, and then the full-time associate vice president for university engagement and protocol. And it's just an absolute my honor to be able to get to welcome you all here today. I am also a very proud alumna of San Francisco State University, class of 1993. I don't know if there's any other 1993ers out there, but I hope so. That was a great year to graduate. After moving to San Francisco in 1990 from Tracy. So thank you so much for coming. You know, in these very difficult times, one of the silver linings we found is that we discovered this great way to be able to reach out to you and to have this opportunity to connect with all of you online and virtually in ways that we could have never done before. We would have always, could only be in person, and we were so limited to when we could get to some place. And now we've realized that we can reach all of you all the time. In fact, we always like to know where you're joining us from. So I'm in San Francisco today. If you want to put in the chat where you're joining us from, we love to find out about that. In fact, look at this, Elk Grove, Sacramento, Arizona, or Iowa, very good. Everybody is still, oh, look at this. Michigan, well, welcome everyone. Thank you. Anyone who's staying up a little bit later to follow this, we thank you as well. So we love being in touch with our alumni. Again, you know, it's been a wonderful resource, not only as the person who gets to bring it, but as the person who gets to consume the content as well as your fellow alum, to realize that we're a Gator for life and that we're always going to have that resource. And times like this just bring us a little bit closer. And I hope that includes bringing us closer all as fellow Gators. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is that we have been developing these events. This, by the way, the cookie event, tonight's event, immediately the second we put it up, people started signing up, and in numbers that we've never seen. This and our wine event seem to be our most popular. So I think we've hit that sweet spot in San Francisco State. And it is my pleasure to get to welcome tonight our presenter, Sybil Yang, who is an associate professor at San Francisco State University in the Department of Hospitality and Tourism Management, which is in the Lamb Family College of Business. Sybil is a native Californian from Southern California. She then moved to Northern California to attend Cal, where she ultimately got her Bachelor of Science degree from the Haas School of Business. And here in California, she learned to love the outdoors and food and finance. But then she moved over to upstate New York. And there she learned to love hospitality, service, and consumer behavior. And those things, she learned all about those things while attending Cornell University, where she earned multiple degrees, culminating in a PhD in consumer behavior. Her research focused on efficiency of restaurant menus, menu board, and wine label design. And her design and pricing recommendations have been directly implemented on hundreds of menus all across the United States. She's also, some of the media, just a couple of the media she's been featured in is the Wall Street Journal and Women's Health magazine. Some of her hobbies include mountain climbing, rock climbing, sailing, and springboard diving, and luckily for us, baking. So she's going to join us today. She's going to answer some questions. She's going to show us how to make some cookies. It's going to kick off our holiday season. I just saw that statistic that 95% of households eat cookies. I think that means 5% were lying about having cookies in the house. I don't know who that other 5% are, but I find that suspicious. So Sybil, can you please join us? Thank you so much for being here. It's just an absolute honor to have you talking to our alumni.
Oh, thank you so much for the super nice intro, Nicole. Hi, my name is Sybil Yang, and welcome to my kitchen. And thank you for putting up with, the video that's going to be shown. It was edited phenomenally by the alumni office, so I have to give them a round of applause for that. But welcome to my kitchen. This is where the video was filmed, and I've been asked to give you guys a little real quick tour of my kitchen. So here you go, coming to you from Oakland, California. This is my kitchen. That's the mixer that I used. But it's small and it's modest, and you don't have to have like a huge kitchen to make efficient foods and cookies. But what I like to do is, much like a commercial kitchen, I keep all of my dry goods just in really large, easily accessible bins. I find that if things are hard to get to and hard to reach, I tend to cook less. So in general, sorry, big lighting, is I actually try to keep bowls and utensils very easily accessible and easy to clean and easy to use. Just because the faster I can set things up, the faster I can get to cooking, and the faster I can get things put away also. So everything about efficiency. As the video is playing, feel free to type questions into the chat. I'll be here to answer all of you guys' questions, either about setting up your own holiday bakes, be it the sugar cookie or the icing recipes or the biscotti recipes, or about baking in general. Just type it into the chat and I will get to it. We'll also have a Q&A session after the video is done. But other than that, I don't know, are we set to go to I don't know, bake some cookies via video? Or should I keep on going? So we are going to make a classic biscotti and divide it up into 3 different parts and kind of put a couple of variations onto the biscotti so you can see kind of just what you need to do. Okay, let's get started. I hate doing dishes, so we're gonna go ahead and minimize the dishware while we work. You guys will have access to the recipe, and I'm just going to make a base of the plain recipe. Recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of butter. You can use butter. You can use any oils that you like. Just remember that you don't necessarily want a strong flavored oil unless that's the taste that you're going for. Something like olive oil, I know we want to be healthy, has a fairly strong taste to it. You might be able to hide it with a chocolate version of biscotti, but short of that, realize that an olive oil taste is gonna come through. I like the classic taste of butter. Although this time I'm gonna go ahead and use a roasted almond oil here because it'll be an almond-based biscotti. At least some of it will be an almond-based biscotti. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure out my wet ingredients into the bowl first. So that would be my oil, and then sugar. And the sugar amount inside this recipe, it looks like I'm putting in a lot, but this will come out to be very lightly flavored in terms of sugar. It's not going to feel like a cookie in your mouth, and it's not going to be a cloyingly sweet biscotti that you might find at Starbucks or at your local cafe. So
sugar, and then 3 eggs. These are from my own chickens. So I have my wet ingredients here. We're gonna go ahead and put some flavoring in, and by flavoring I mean like vanilla or almond extract. If you want to use a lemon extract, you can also go ahead and use that. You can also change it up. Di Serono, a bit of Maker's Mark for a more adultish version. Whatever type of alcohol flavor that you like. You know, vanilla extract is really just vanilla in an alcohol base. And we're gonna go with 2 teaspoons. Combine all the wet ingredients just until it's like homogenized. And you don't have to be super gentle with it. Oh my God, I smell all the almond. It's fantastic. So we have our wet ingredients here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and put my sieve on top over here and sift in my dry ingredients. So, dry ingredients, I'm gonna start off with 3 1/3 cups of flour, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and my 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Okay. If you're using a unsalted butter, which is what the recipe calls for, then put in the salt. If all you have at home is salted butter, leave the salt out. Okay, so all of my dry ingredients are now in, and I'm just gonna combine. And I'm gonna do this gently. You don't have to be too gentle with it. It's not like you're making a cake. Don't worry about over mixing this dough, because it's not like you're gonna get a chewy cake or a rubbery muffin. That's not how this recipe goes. If your mixture comes out a bit dry, feel free to add a little bit of water. Add water a teaspoon at a time if needed. If it's too wet, you're gonna want to go ahead and add a little bit of flour as you go. I'm gonna go ahead and separate this mixture out into thirds. And this gives you a chance to create 3 different flavors. I'm going to go ahead and put 1/3 back inside the bowl because I want to make a chocolate version of this. So for a chocolate version, I'm just going to go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. I'm adding a 1/2 cup of almonds. So for this biscotti base, for each third of the recipe, so approximately a cup of flour's worth of the recipe, you can use up to 1/2 cup of whatever solid accompaniment you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and use slivered almonds to go with the cocoa biscotti. So I'm just going to kind of knead this until the cocoa is evenly distributed. I'm going to go ahead and kind of roll it into a log, and I'll go ahead and set that aside. For another third of my dough, I'm going to go ahead and put in pistachios, dried apricots, and then dried cranberries. It's not that these flavors have a particular awesome combination or taste to them. It's just I really like the colors. And when you cut this open, the green, the orange, and then the red just kind of pop out at you, which makes it look pretty awesome, especially if you're gonna give it as gifts to people. Got another log, or a second log over here. I'm gonna go ahead and put some really classic flavors to this. So I'm gonna make it lemon, so a little citrusy. I'm gonna go ahead and zest some of this lemon. And then anise, anise seeds. Okay, so lemon zest and anise seeds. This is a very classic Italian combination for biscotti. It's a very fresh, a more adult flavor because, you know, frankly, it's licoricey. So with the anise, so the kiddies might not like this flavor combination, but frankly, it's classic and it goes really, really well with a light tea. Lightly dust the bench, and we have our 3 types. That's the pistachio, apricot, and cranberry. That's our lemon and anise, and then the cocoa and almond, the chocolate almond version. Okay. Biscotti means twice baked, like 2 bakes. Okay. So biscotti is these are gonna get baked twice. The first time it gets baked, it's gonna get baked in a loaf, in a whole piece. So we need to shape it into its kind of initial kind of dome-ish type of shape, and then bake it. When it's partially baked, we're going to take it out, and then we're going to cut it into those into the finger shapes, and then go ahead and bake it again. And those are the 2 bakes. So the way that biscotti gets its shape, okay, is you literally just flatten it out with your hand, and depending on how big your hand is, right, you may have longer or shorter biscotti. You'll notice that there's a slight hump going this way, and it's a asymmetrical hump, right, because it's fatter over here and then it kind of thins out over there. That's the classic shape for a biscotti. So when you bake a chocolate biscotti, make sure that you're baking them with non-chocolate looking biscottis, just because it's brown, it's going to be very difficult for you to tell when it browns inside the oven. And so you want to make sure that you do have some other indicator on the pan of, you know, when the cookie is actually going to be done. So this goes into a preheated 375 Fahrenheit oven for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come on back. What we're looking for is when you reach in, you want to kind of feel the top, and it needs to be kind of solid so it doesn't bounce back. Sorry, it doesn't leave an imprint. It doesn't feel soft and mushy when you press your finger down. You're not going to get too much color on it. You see the lighter versions over here. There's not too much color on it, and that's fine. Your biscotti isn't going to be totally dark. So I've got my biscotti out of the oven. They have a nice firm feeling to them, so meaning I can press down and it's firm. I press down and it's firm. But it doesn't feel like a cracker, right? Okay. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is put them out on a cooling rack, and we're going to go ahead and let them cool. And then once they're cool to the touch, we're going to go ahead and slice them into edible biscotti size instead of just like a loaf of biscotti here. So the biscotti loaves are now cool to the touch, right? And now that means that the starches have gelatinized enough where we can go ahead and cut these, and the crumb of the biscotti will be fine. Look at that colorfulness. I'm just going to go ahead and cut at an angle with a serrated knife. So a serrated knife is a knife with serrations like that, little scallops at the end. What you do not want to go ahead and use is a chef's knife, because a chef's knife in general will not be able to go through the hard crust on the outside. And use a sawing motion, because you don't want to just go straight down and crush your biscotti. With each one of these pieces, you're just going to want to go ahead and lay them onto a sheet tray with enough room so that air can circulate around. So you'll notice that the inside is still very moist. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and dry it out with the second baking. Okay? So go ahead and follow through with the rest of your biscotti. Cut carefully, and we will be back. So kind of as a last step, if you want to be a little extra on these biscotti, you can always dip them in a little bit of chocolate. So I have some melted white chocolate here. This started off as a baker's white baking chocolate. Actually just break it up into little cubes in a stainless steel bowl and into the oven between batches of cookies, and just dip very lightly because I don't want a big coat, just a nice thin coating, and on the baking sheet. I'm gonna dust off whatever extra crumbs might be on the biscotti and then just continue dipping. And you know, this takes some time, a little bit of patience. If you want to do this with your kids, you can also do this with your kids. The chocolate should be about body temperature, so it won't be too hot for them to handle. Again, very thin layer. And I'm using white chocolate for the non-chocolate, you know, flavored biscotti. If I used dark chocolate, all you would really taste would be the dark chocolate on these. For the chocolate biscotti, I'll end up using I'll dip in some dark chocolate. So this is a classic rolled out sugar cookie recipe, perfect for shapes and decorating. And once you taste this cookie, you will never go back to the store-bought sugar cookie doughs or dough mixes because they will just taste so artificial and frankly disgusting after you taste one made of basic ingredients and good quality ingredients. The quality of the vanilla that you use will also make a huge difference, but at the end of the day, it is the quality of the fat, the butter that you end up using. I'm going to go ahead and use a European butter, just because European butters, they've gone through a slight fermentation process, and there's just a special taste to it. So I would just recommend using a high quality butter. If not a European style butter, then go for a creamery style butter of some sort. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started then. The butter should be softened, so it should just be at room temperature, so Bay Area room temperature, you know, in the high 60s or 70s. I'm using a salted butter this time because the recipe does not have a salt amount inside of it, so salted butter here is fine. If you have an unsalted butter, that's fine. You can go ahead and add in ½ teaspoon of salt. And we're going to go ahead and add our sugar in here, so 1 full cup of sugar, so ratio of 1 to 1. And we're going to do what's called the creaming method. Here, I'm just going to coat the butter, coat the sugar in fat. I have it on speed 4, just to kind of soften up the butter a little bit. We don't want this to go for so long that the butter starts to melt and melt the sugar. So what we want is still graininess, but we want the butter to be evenly distributed with the sugar so that the sugar is completely coated, and perhaps even get a slightly light, fluffy-ish texture. Okay, so everything's kind of coming together, so I'm going to turn up the speed a little bit. Okay, at this point, we're going to add in the rest of our liquid ingredients, and that would be 1 large egg, a good quality vanilla extract, back on 4, and let me show you that texture. The mixture still looks relatively fluffy, okay, but there are no streaks of egg or vanilla inside of it. Everything's completely homogenized in there. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and put our dry ingredients in. What I have here is 3 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to go ahead and sift in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Sift it in here, and we're sifting because we don't want lumps inside the flour. And you don't have to alternate back and forth when you put the flour into the butter mixture. You can just go ahead and dump it in. I'm just going to go ahead and use the paddle, kind of paddle in some of the mixture from the sides, and go ahead and put that back on. And when I start to see things kind of combine a little bit, don't want to mix it too much, but don't worry about over mixing. The mixture can still look fairly crumbled, but just as long as there are no streaks of white, like no dry flour left inside the mixture, then you're good to go. And that's a good texture, right? If I can just kind of grab a wad full and it holds together. At this point, I'm going to turn the dough out onto the bench, and I'm just going to kind of push the dough together. And I'm going to knead it a couple of times just to get a uniform texture on the dough. To make your life easier, I'm going to go ahead and break this into 4 parts because we want to work with the dough in small flats because it's going to be easier to handle and cut in small batches, and you don't want the dough to sit out while you're, working in batches, because the butter will be soft, and that makes rolling out shapes very difficult if the dough is sticky. We want to work in small batches. We're going to wrap them and then keep the rest inside the refrigerator. Okay, welcome back. It's chilled to the point where it's stiff. And we're going to lightly dust. And so this is like lightly dust. Start rolling out our dough. Don't roll over the edge of the dough. That will get you pieces that are too thin. You want to get the dough into as even and uniform of a piece as possible. Don't roll it out too thin. You want it at about 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. And you have several choices of like different types of cookie cutters, right? All that I would recommend for any given tray is that you cut shapes that are similar in size, because you want the cookies to cook relatively evenly as possible. Let's go for the small ones here. I'm gonna dip the cutters in some flour and kind of pat off the excess, and just one at a time onto my cookie tray. And you can gather up the pieces and re-roll the dough up to 2 times if need be. I would recommend the smaller the cookie, the thinner the dough, just because the cookie will eat better that way. I'm using a silicone baking mat on my sheet tray. If you don't have a silicone baking mat, you can go ahead and use parchment paper. I would not recommend aluminum foil. It creates wrinkles. You can rarely pull out a perfectly smooth sheet. If you can, you're super talented. But this dough has a lot of butter inside of it, so it would really release off of anything. And this is a good way to cut cookies and just pop them directly onto the baking sheet afterwards. Baking is just 375. I would start checking them about 7 minutes in. The smaller the size of the cookie, the sooner you want to check the cookies. Don't be afraid of opening up the oven door to check on the cookies. What you're looking for is light browning on the edges. So now we're going to go ahead and make the frosting. The frosting is actually super easy to make. 2 egg whites, very, very clean, no oil egg whites. A full teaspoon of cream of tartar, 2 1/3 cups of powdered sugar. You can also make this a lemon frosting, in which case you can add in, half a teaspoon of lemon juice instead, but I'm just going to go ahead and make vanilla. And start this off slowly because you don't want powdered sugar to go everywhere. So when you see the streaks kind of hold their shape, So a very soft peak at this point. You see how the threads, right, they don't melt. They kind of stay and are visible. So this is a very good piping consistency. Okay, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and transfer some of this icing into a piping bag. And I just have my piping bag lining a small pint glass. This will be my white icing piping. And then I'll go ahead and make a green one too. Go ahead and add my food coloring into the piping bag. And make this fairly deep. And I'm just going to go ahead and close up that bag. Now, you can also buy silicone piping bags, and I do have them, but I wanted you guys to be able to see the colors that we're working with here. So we've got a couple of our basic colors here. Go ahead and put a lid over this. Now, the method that we're going to be working with today, we're going to edge our cookies. Just cut it. We're going to edge our cookies and then we're going to flood them. Okay, so generally you want to hold the piping bag in your dominant hand, of course, and the icing will really be used to trace a flooding outline with the plan that we will go back in and flood the outline with a solid amount of icing. So not much to look at, but we're just going to outline the shapes. And after a couple of cookies, kind of like pancakes, the first pancake off the griddle is never going to be pretty because you're kind of learning the speed, the heat of your griddle. Here you're kind of learning the speed of the icing that you went ahead and mixed. Now we are going to flood. When you flood, it just means we're going to flood an area with a solid color. So at this point, I am not going to trace with the green anymore. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, for every half cup of frosting, or icing, half cup of icing, you want to thin it down slowly because there really isn't any going back. And I'm going to add a little bit of water at a time. So what I'm going to do when I flood is I'm going to take a cookie in my hand. I'm going to take a cookie in my hand, make sure I don't drip, and flood the surface of the cookie. And here I'm just going to go ahead and use a bamboo skewer and work the icing to my piped edge. And you see how with cookie presses you can't see the imprint underneath anymore. So I would recommend holding on to the cookie press and hold on to the cookie press and pipe based off of the cookie press itself. And that's how you flood. And so you see it goes relatively quickly once you have a system down, but you can choose whatever step in the process to include the kids. If you think the kids have patience enough to, pipe an outline, wait for that to dry, and then flood and then decorate, then great. If you think they'd only be interested in the decorating part, then I would say, get all the cookies to this state where it's flooded, right? And then, the next day come back and then have all the kids come back and they can pipe in decorations and put sprinkles and stuff like that on top of the already flooded cookies.
Hello, everyone. That concludes our video demonstration. We will now open up our Q&A with Sybil Yang. If you haven't already done so, please use the chat or Q&A feature to ask any questions. But Sybil, first of all, the first question I see right off the bat is, how do you store these cookies? They look really yummy, so how can we make sure we have them as long as possible?
So I just keep them in a Tupperware container. So wait for them to completely cool. If you try to store them when they aren't completely cool, the heat is going to release more moisture. And if you seal it completely up in an airtight container while they're still warm, everything's just going to turn soggy from the excess moisture. And usually whenever I get like some package that has these, and this is my salt container with one of these like silica gel, do not eat type of things, I just throw them into a container, and these will suck up the moisture in anything that you need. So I have these little packets in my sea salt, in my sugar container, in my flour container. And when I have something like cookies that I want to stay dry, I throw one of those packets in there too.
That's an awesome tip. Thank you so much. I never even thought about that.
And so I see that Kimmy has a question on building decorating skills. I would say just be patient. Just be patient with the decorating skills, and it's more about getting the proper consistency of the piping icing, that it isn't too runny. Go too thick before you go too runny. Because you can always add just a tiny, like literally like eyedroppers of water in there to slowly loosen up the icing. And, you know, ugly cookies taste just as pretty. Triple the amount. Yeah, you know something, this cookie recipe is actually very flexible. So you can make 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Just make sure that your mixer can handle it. I have a KitchenAid here, and even the 4-quart version should be able to handle, I would say, a 3 times version of this cookie recipe. This one's This one's actually a 7-quart version, and I don't even want to eat all the cookies that this version can make, but just make sure that you don't overwork your mixer, because that's usually the test that these mixers go through, is actually cookie dough. And you'll burn out the worm wheel, because anything short of a 7-quart, the worm wheel in there is plastic. And it's made to be the fail point, so the engine doesn't burn out if you try to mix too much cookie dough. So it's meant to break the worm wheel before it breaks the engine. So just a heads up on that. What tips do you have for increasing or decreasing the amount of ingredients from the recipe? So for the sugar cookie recipe, so this I would say is a high-class sugar cookie recipe, meaning it's not meant to be cloyingly sweet or to the sweetness level of, like, you know, commercial cookie doughs. If you're used to commercial cookie dough recipes, this is going to taste bland to you. But this cookie dough base was designed with the thought that you are going to put sugar icing on top of it. And the combination of the sugar topping, the icing, and the cookie together will make for a balanced sweetness. So when I grew up, my mom was always like, oh, American pastries, they're all too sweet. And she'd just automatically off the top cut like a cup of sugar out of everything. This cookie base already has the amount of sugar cut down to that point. Same thing with the biscotti recipe. The biscotti recipe, if you've ever had like Zwieback toast, or like the kitty teething cookies, it's a little bit sweeter than that. And that's because traditional biscotti was meant to be eaten, dipped into like Vinsanto or like a sherry or a port or so. So those beverages are generally pretty sweet anyway. So you want something fairly balanced. I would say if you wanted to add sugar, you could go ahead and add sugar. If you want to change out some of the flour for like wheat flour, like the whole grain wheat flour, I would say at the most, maybe sub out a 1/4 cup of the regular flour for wheat flour, but I wouldn't go any higher than that. If you're planning on using any other type of flours, you're on your own. I haven't tried those types of changes to the recipe otherwise. Diabetic, can I use wheat flour instead for the, so if you're talking about whole wheat flour, yes, I would try using, I would try subbing out maybe half of the flour for whole wheat flour at the most. And I'm willing to go up that high, like in terms of a substitute for whole wheat flour, because we're not worried about gluten formation, and we're not worried about leavening and holding structure in that way. The only thing is it'll taste wheaty. Yeah, so if you don't mind it tasting extra whole wheaty, then I'd say feel free to sub up to, like, you know, half of the flour for wheat flour in the biscotti recipe. Cooking and baking pans. You know something? No, don't invest in the more expensive ones. Tell you what you should do. You should go to Smart and Final or Cash and Carry and buy the aluminum baking pans that exist. So, forgive the noise. So literally one of these things, right? It's commercially what we use in restaurant kitchens, and I guarantee you that they will be so much cheaper than the ones that you get at Williams-Sonoma. They are built like, sorry, a brick shithouse. You can abuse them and there's no problem to it. But I would go ahead and buy a silicone baking mat to put on top of it. And bake with the aluminum pan, with the silicone baking mat on top of it. You don't have to buy a Silpat brand aluminum baking mat. Just Google silicone baking mat on Amazon and you'll get a gazillion listings for it. And that combination, that's all you need. You don't need to put down aluminum foil or parchment paper or whatever. And the silicone baking mat is essentially infinitely reusable. So don't worry about investing in super expensive pans, get the restaurant grade one at cash and carry, or I think Restaurant Depot now with the whole COVID thing is actually allowing non-commercial accounts. So you can also go to Restaurant Depot and pick it up. Those pans are also, they have an air barrier layer in them also. So it's not like you're cooking on a wok or something like that where it's just a thin piece of metal either. Those pans don't warp very easily either. And you can bake a pizza on the underside of that sheet tray also. Oh yeah, they're called sheet trays, not cookie sheets. So if you're looking inside those restaurant supply stores, that's what you would ask for, is a sheet tray. And for home ovens, get a quarter size sheet tray, quarter or half size sheet tray. Those should fit inside your oven well. Parchment paper, you don't need parchment paper if you have a silicone mat. And so, so this is the expensive, like original version of a Silpat. These things, when they first came out, they were like, this thing would have cost like $30 when they first came out, but they've since been flooded. The market has since been flooded by, this is a cheap knockoff version, but it's also silicone. And these you can stick inside the dishwasher. We use them inside the Vista Room, the student-run restaurant on campus. And they can go through a commercial dishwasher with no problems whatsoever. So I would go ahead and use that. If you're roasting vegetables or you're doing any form of baking, you can also just go ahead and bake on top of that. And everything releases from it anyways. When I temper chocolate, so the chocolate that was left over from the biscotti that I didn't get to use, I just scraped it all onto one of those silicone baking mats. And then once it's set, I just peeled it off of the silicone baking mat and then like crumbled it up into like little bits, and they're going to go into a chocolate chip cookie recipe the next time I make one. So silicone baking mats, not parchment paper. What type of oil is recommended for the biscotti? Really, any oil that you want. My preference is butter for the biscotti. I just happen to use a roasted oil, like almond oil. In there because I wanted the almond flavoring inside of it. I would just recommend if you use olive oil, use olive oil if you're making a chocolate biscotti because the chocolate can hide the taste of the olive. Good olive oil will have a very strong taste. So just keep that in mind with whatever oil you end up choosing. And then from there, you have your health considerations of, do you actually want to use one of those super processed vegetable or seed oils like canola seed oil or something like that. I'll leave it up to the dietetics, faculty to say whether they're terrible for your health or not. But butter is super tasty. Bacon fat is super tasty, but strongly flavored too. Yeah. Is there a preferred silicone mat? The gold standard is the one by Silpat. This company, Silpat. Every commercial kitchen, this is what they have. And they're thicker than the super cheap ones because if you look closely, the hatch marks in it, those are carbon fibers. So it's reinforced. The other thing that you guys can use, I think these things are sold as like grill catchers or so, I don't know, but it's like a Teflon sheet, essentially, and you can bake on these too. The only problem with these is that they're very dark, so they will absorb heat, so things will bake faster on this, even though it's thinner than the silicone baking mat. But the good part about these is if you have like weird shaped tins or cake pans or something like that, you can cut these to shape. Without feeling too badly about it. So I would Google like a Teflon sheets or Teflon baking sheets. That's what these things are. But if you're looking for silicone baking mat, I would say Silpat.
I said someone was asking if it would take overnight to dry after you flooded them enough to dry, or how long would that take?
I would say the flood will take, for the small cookies, I was able to decorate them same night. So I would say give it an hour or two. I didn't put the icing too thick either. So if you're really caked on the icing, it'll take longer to set. But you can also have a test cookie and then just lightly tap your finger on it. And if it kind of crumbles and crusts the way that a good, wow, now I want Krispy Kreme. The icing on a Krispy Kreme does, then it hasn't set yet. But for small cookies like that, I would say give it about 2 hours. So if you're working with children, you might want to, have the cookies baked and flooded, right? And then just like a whole bunch of piping bags and then like sprinkles and stuff like that for them the next day. And then they can decorate however they want to the next day with pre-flooded cookies. You can actually use this recipe for gingerbread houses or sugar cookie houses. The icing sugar at the icing consistency can be used as the glue to hold the house together too.
I'm not sure. Someone had asked a little bit earlier. I might have missed it. I apologize. About some other kinds of spices. Can you work different types of spices into these sugar cookies, or is there anything you would recommend or should we keep them very much a sugar cookie?
I mean, you could put dry spices, like baking spices, if you wanted to in there. But if you're looking for like a gingerbread cookie recipe, or if you wanted to go like Christmas spice onto it, I would literally just go with the gingerbread cookie recipe because the brownness and the flavors of those cookies, they usually include molasses and brown sugar in there, and that's where you get the richness of the flavoring. Flavor, which just throws off the balance of the entire recipe. So we would be dealing with an entire other recipe. If you're looking for variations to make, but I mean, if you just wanted to add some cinnamon into this recipe, that's not a problem. Some cinnamon and nutmeg or something like that. I'm not sure what other types of spices you might want to throw in there. But if you're looking for gingerbread cookies or something like that, I would just go with the gingerbread cookie recipe. A brand of disposable piping bag that I like. Something I love eBay. So you can go onto eBay and just Google up or eBay up disposable piping bags, and you'll come up with a pack like this. And these are obviously made in China, but they are just super convenient, right? Just cut and this pack of, this pack of 100 or so, was less than $5. And then you can also buy it in the bigger size. Amazon also has the same thing. So this is like a pack of 100, also probably less than $5. If you just go down to Michael's or something like that, Wilton, right, the traditional cake baking folk, they have disposable piping bags. These are pretty rugged though, so I feel like this is kind of a waste to use it just as one time, like for one-time use for piping sugar icing or so. So you can also make traditional piping bags out of parchment papers. That's not a problem either. The other thing that you can do is I have reusable silicone piping bags, and then what you would just go ahead and do is put in like a piping tip here, like a very fine piping tip. And this is definitely more eco-friendly than the disposable ones. And in a pinch, you can also just use sandwich bags, like super cheap sandwich bags, and then cut the tip of the sandwich bag.
At the very beginning, I noticed that our friend Eric Lamb asked, what kind of wine do you recommend for while you're baking?
Wine right here. I am actually not a promo, but a promo is, this is the Ridge Estate Chardonnay. I finally decided to break it out. And oh my God, I got myself a, one of those, I don't know, one of those gizmos, so I don't have to take the cork out, so I don't have to polish off an entire freaking bottle after a day of teaching. Right, Ridge, fantastic. Amazing that both of their wineries escaped both of the fires in the Santa Cruz Mountains and up in Sonoma.
Well, so does anyone else have any other questions? Or is everybody off making their cookies? I think we've inspired a lot of people to open up their kitchens, dig out those Christmas and those holiday cutters that they've had up in the cupboard for a while and give those a go. So we can't thank you enough. This was so much fun, very exciting. I can't wait to try those. I have to admit, my mother and I tried sugar cookies last year, and they did not, they tasted, as you said, they tasted just fine. Some of them looked better than others, but now I'm gonna give it another shot, and I'll make sure that we watch the video as we do it. So what are we showing here?
The mini roller. Somebody asked where it's from. It's Padrini. It's by Padrini. My sister got it for me because she wanted ravioli.
And the Baby Yoda, where did that come from?
Baby Yoda, there is a Star Wars pack of cookie presses on the Williams-Sonoma website right now, and I do believe it's on sale too. So
perfect. But Baby Yoda is huge in our office, I have to say. So, well, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone who joined us and spending your Thursday evening with us. We've had the link to the recipes in the chat. We'll get that sent out as well. We'll also make this entire recording available. We have some other videos on our YouTube channel as well. You can hear a little more about from some of our alumni about some movies that they've worked on or produced. We had a wine tasting seminar that clearly we have wine lovers here, so we'll want to make sure you check that out as well. That was from a San Francisco State alumni-run winery. And Sybil, thank you. You can come bake cookies for us anytime. I suspect that there's all kinds of things that you bake that will be just wonderful, and we'll be calling you up hopefully to run another seminar for us again. If you're willing, we hope you'll come back.
Oh my God, I had so much fun, and I'm still eating cookies.
Yes, good. Well, I'm going to give the Gator chomp to your cookies. All Gators approve. And thank you again. Thank you for joining us. We hope you had a good time. Everybody have a really wonderful, healthy, happy holiday season. And we are wishing everybody a fantastic 2021. Thank you for joining us.